Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time to a place where the scent of crushed olives and ash lingers in the morning air, where merchants shuffle through stone alleys, balancing wooden crates filled with mysterious, soft green bricks. You're in Aleppo, to be precise, just as the sun cracks open another long day. Here, behind thick walls, stained with centuries of steam and smoke, men and women are beginning a craft so slow, so precise, and so oddly scientific. You'll wonder how it hasn't been turned into a Netflix docuseries yet. You won't be inventing soap tonight, thank goodness, but you will walk with the people who did. Not the flashy scientists in ivory towers, but olive-stained craftsmen who whispered secrets about boiling temperatures, rainwater purity, and how to test lye strength with the grace of a fig leaf. It's going to get technical. It's going to get weird. And you probably won't survive this if you're allergic to mildly interesting history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where the Sleepy History Squad is tuning in from .now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through Aleppo's waking streets, your sandals brushing against cobblestones still damp with the last night's dew. It's barely dawn, but already the faint aroma of boiling oil and herbal ash clings to the corners of the bazaar. Most shops are still shuttered. But at the far edge of the spice market where the air tastes like cinnamon, sweat, and 100 whispered deals, you hear it, the steady, sloshy rhythm of paddles inside wooden vats. Someone's making soap. In the Ottoman world, soap wasn't just a domestic chore, it was status. Science and statecraft rolled into a humble greenish cube, and Aleppo was one of the grand centers of it all. The soap from here wasn't ordinary, it was legendary. The blend was simple, but guarded with monk-like reverence. Olive oil, water, lye made from wood ash, and the occasional infusion of laurel oil for that extra silky lather. These weren't ingredients, they were spells. You peer into one courtyard, workshop the doorway gaping like the open mouth of an old oven. Inside, 3 men with sleeves rolled up to their elbows stir a great steaming cauldron with poles taller than they are. No digital thermometer, here just the wisdom of muscle memory, and the experience passed from father to son, to very confused apprentice. The olive oil has turned frothy and golden, thickening by the minute. The paddlers grunt in rhythm, as if keeping time with the heartbeat of a centuries-old process. Here's a boring but delightful historical fact to lull you further. The earliest written records of soap-like substances date back to 2800 BCE in Babylon, but the Ottomans perfected their version over hundreds of years, turning it into an economic and cultural engine by the 16th century. Aleppo's soap, in particular, was prized for its purity and softness. And if you're thinking, did they have dermatologists back then? Well, sort of. Court physicians often recommended specific soap types for everything from dry skin to melancholy. Now, a quirky tidbit to keep things cozy. Many workshops used the same wooden stirring sticks for decades without washing them. Purpose. They believed the seasoned wood helped stabilize the blend, like a sourdough starter, but ... stickier. In fact, soap masters would pass down their poles like heirlooms, naming them things like Old Whirly or Frothfather. Okay, maybe not that last one, but some were genuinely given names and treated with eerie affection. As you lean against the doorway, the scent shifts. A sharp, citrusy temps of fresh laurel oil fills the air, added right at the end to scent the mixture. You watch the men test the batch by dribbling some onto a flat stone slab. It cools and hardens into a green disc. One of them presses a thumb into it, nods solemnly, and mutters something about 1 more hour. It's all about timing. 1 moment too soon, and you get crumbly slop. 1 moment too late, and it's rock-hard sludge. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans devised their unique soap-making methods independently or adapted them from Byzantine and Arab chemists before them. Soap existed long before the empire. Sure, but the particular fermentation and curing method used here, that's a chewy academic debate, often lost between footnotes and friendly jabs over ancient recipe scrolls. You wander deeper, past another workshop where soap has already cooled. Dozens of green blocks lie stacked like cheese wheels in a dry chamber, cut and stamped with symbols that mark their origins, family, and sometimes even their healing properties. Some stamps are elegant calligraphy, others barely legible squiggles. That probably meant something very important to someone 300 years ago. Your steps echo in the alley now. You pass by women hauling buckets of briny water, apprentices rolling fresh-laid soap into neat pyramids, and a boy with ash streaked across his nose trying to sneak a sniff of the laurel barrels when nobody's watching. The city is fully awake now, and you've only just begun this slow lathering story. You yawn, eyes closing for a moment as the scent of soap wraps around you like a warm woolen blanket. You could fall asleep right here on a pile of centuries-old suds, but don't. Theirs lie ahead, and arguments and fig leaves. You trail the scent of simmering oil down a narrower alley now, your fingers brushing against walls stained a pale buttery green from years of splash and steam. The sounds change, tooless, bustling, more focused. There's a rhythmic scraping of wood against stone, the occasional low grunt of effort, and a sudden burst of laughter from someone who's clearly just spilled something important. Welcome to the quieter heart of the process, the part where olives, ash, and old-school chemistry start mingling in oddly elegant chaos. Let's be honest, you probably never thought much about how soap is born, and certainly not how scientific the Ottomans got with it. But here's the recipe in its rawest form, repeated with religious fidelity for generations. Crushed olives, filtered water, and white ash. That's it. That's the whole trick. Except it's not. The olive oil used wasn't the pristine golden stuff we imagine drizzled over salad. This was usually low-grade, murky, even borderline rancid by the time it hit the vat. The Ottomans weren't wasteful. In fact, their soap industry relied on repurposing the leftovers, what we might call pumice today, to something unexpectedly luxurious. You're watching now, as a thick stream of this oil is ladled from a barrel, its surface shimmering like a tired emerald, into an enormous copper basin. Meanwhile, over to your left, someone's tending the fire that will heat it. All wood ash is piled in neat little mounds gray, fluffy, deceptively soft. That ash, when mixed with water, creates lye. And lye, while sounding like a villain from a fantasy novel, is really just a powerful alkaline solution that eats through. Fat, it's harsh, it's temperamental, and it's completely essential. Without it, your soap stays oily mush now. For a historical fact that might surprise you, while European soap makers in the same era often relied on animal fats, including tallow, rendered from sheep or cow, the Ottomans stuck with plant-based ingredients, especially olive and laurel oils. This wasn't just a culinary preference. It had everything to do with religious principles, regional availability, and the desired softness of the final product. Islamic dietary laws frowned on certain animal byproducts, and besides, olive oil was abundant, sacred, and versatile. You watch a young assistant gingerly add ash water into the heating olive oil. Not too fast, not too slow. The goal here is to saponify us. That's a real word. The oils, transforming them into a substance that's neither grease nor sludge. There's no measuring cup. Instead, the master dips in a wooden spoon, lifts a stringy strand of the liquid, and squints at the way it stretches and snaps. He nods, mutters something about the third boil, and returns to his stirring. A fringe tidbit you didn't ask for, but now can't forget. Some soap makers whispered that rainwater specifically, the first rainfall after a dry spell, made best lye solutions. Something about its purity, its sky-kissed softness. So yes, there were men who ran into courtyards holding buckets aloft like lightning-struck wizards every autumn. You can't make this stuff up. Well, someone probably did, but enough of them believed it to write it down. And here's the real kicker. They could tell when the chemical reaction was working by smell. You lean in a little, letting your nose do the work. At first, there's just that heavy olive scent, but soon it turns just slightly more waxy, more floral, almost like warmed candle wax mixed with faint citrus. The reaction has begun. The oils are breaking down, bonding with the lye, creating cleanliness. Still, historians can't agree on whether the Ottomans discovered this formula through trial and error, or borrowed it from earlier Egyptian and Mesopotamian techniques. Some argue for independent innovation, citing regional tweaks like laurel infusion and long curing methods. Others point to the movement of knowledge along trade routes and say, essentially, hey, everyone was borrowing from everyone. There's no definitive answer, just a vat of slowly thickening goo. The paddling continues. You notice the men stirring the mixture, are swapping stories while they work, teasing the youngest among them for forgetting to salt the ash. Salt helps harden the soap later too little, and the bars come out like warm butter too much, and they crack into useless flakes. You'd think it's all guesswork, but no. There's an unspoken math behind their motions. Temperature control, done by feel. Consistency checks, done with a finger dipped and cooled, then sniffed like it's a fine soup. And there's a ritual to it, too. Some soap makers insisted the olive oil had to be stirred only clockwise during the first boil. Others swore by specific stirring times, for 77 minutes exactly, or by chanting short prayers as they worked. Superstition, maybe, but it worked. And when it didn't, they just said the ash was moody. You sit on a wooden stool now, just out of reach of the heat, watching as the mixture changes. It no longer looks like oil. It's thicker, opaque, with a dull sheen that ripples across its surface like dragonfly wings. The air smells sweeter, nawif, slightly smoky. The fire's been banked, the paddles slow. This part of the process can last hours. It's not glamorous, and certainly not thrilling, but it's weirdly meditative. You start to wonder how many batches of soap one person could make in a lifetime. Probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands. That's a lot of elbow grease for something that melts. Underwater, one last observation before you wander off to the next courtyard. Some soap masters kept diaries scratched into the backs of wooden boards, or buried in ledgers among olive bin voices. They noted things like bad boil during eclipse, or used salty ash from Smyrna too sharp. One entry, preserved in a crumbling museum archive, simply reads, "Today we made the best soap I've ever seen." No one else noticed. You stretch, eyes heavy now. The air is thick with steam and faint laughter, and the soup of olives and ash bubbles quietly in its copper cradle. You shuffle your feet along the uneven stones, the smell of warm oil lingering on your clothes, like a perfume only soap makers would appreciate. A few steps ahead, there's another workshop, this one quieter, more focused, as if the air itself knows the next part is tricky. You duck beneath a sagging wooden beam and step into the low-ceilinged space where the real drama begins. Tonight, it's not politics or palace intrigue, it's live, and it's controversial. The vats are still, their contents thick and gelatinous, after hours of slow boiling. This is the point where precision becomes obsession. You see an older man with creased cheeks and soot on his forehead, bending over the mixture, dipping a sliver of dried fig into it. He stares at the fig's skin the way a jeweler might inspect a diamond. No smile, just serious fig business. This is lie testing, Ottoman style. And if you're wondering whether that fig test actually worked, well, historians still argue whether it was effective or just elaborate kitchen theater. Some claim the sugars in the fig react to the alkali, turning the flesh dark or soft when the lye balance is off. Others roll their eyes and say it's just tradition dressed up in fruit. The great lye debate, as you're now calling it, centers on one question. Did the Ottomans really understand the chemical process? Or were they winging it with flair? On one side, you have evidence of meticulous measurements sash, weighed to the ounce, boiling, tracked by time and consistency. On the other, there's an alarming number of written records that mention dreams, lucky days, and divine intuition play as soap-making tools. So yes, science and superstition held hands more often than you'd expect. You glance at the tools lined up on a bench nearby. Wooden spoons, fig slices, flat stones for cooling, even glass flasks. Someone must have traded, probably from Venice or Cairo. These people weren't isolated. They gathered tips from everywhere: Arabic manuscripts, Greek apothecaries, Indian perfumers. The result was a constantly evolving recipe, tweaked and tuned depending on the weather, the mood, or the confidence of the master soap maker. Now for your required boring historical fact, delivered gently, like a bar of unscented soap to the face. Ottoman records from the 16th century show that soap makers were given tax breaks if they produced large enough batches for export. That's right. Good lye chemistry didn't just keep your skin soft, kept the government happy. A city like Aleppo could produce thousands of kilos of soap per month, especially during peak curing season, and much of it was loaded onto ships, headed for ports across the Mediterranean. But before it ever touched foreign hands, that lye had to be right. You watch as the elder soap maker scrapes a cooled layer off the top of the batch and folds it between his fingers. It bends but doesn't break. He nods. That's what they were waiting for. A perfect balance between firmness and flexibility. The right lye concentration meant the soap would cure well, last long, and most importantly, not burn the skin off its user. Small details. A fringe tidbit floats your way now, whispered by a passing apprentice. Some soap makers believed that leaving a piece of raw meat next to a lye test batch overnight could reveal its potency by morning. If the meat was gray and swollen, the lye was too strong. If it was unchanged, too weak. And if the dog ate it, well, that was a different problem altogether. You take a moment to rest on a nearby bench, now imagining a room full of ancient soap, chemists muttering to themselves, waving fig sticks, and sniffing meat slabs. It's both absurd and impressively methodical. Back to the process, because now they're moving. Once satisfied with the lye levels, they begin pouring the mixture into large stone molds. These molds look like long, shallow trays with smooth marble or lime bases to help the soap set evenly. You're watching history harden in real time, and it's slow, so slow. Each pour is followed by smoothing, tapping, muttering, and the occasional eyebrow raise if the texture looks even slightly off. At this stage, mistakes are costly. Too much ash residue and the soap dries chalky. Too little salt and the bars come out soft like half-cooked rice. One overzealous stir and the air pockets can ruin the whole batch's density. It's like baking, except the dough can strip paint if you mess up. You ask yourself, quietly, how anyone figured this all out. The answer, of course, is generations of practice. These weren't just tradesmen. They were artisans, chemists, sometimes philosophers. One 17th century manuscript even includes a poem about soap being the middle child of water and fire. Charming, if a bit melodramatic, but also kind of accurate. The molds are covered now, wrapped in thick cloth to retain warmth. You watch the steam drift upward like lazy ghosts curling around the rafters. Someone opens a side window to let in the breeze. The room cools by a degree, and the soap starts to set. You blink slowly, lulled by the flickering shadows and the heavy herbal scent still hanging in the air. Everything here takes time. Nothing is rushed. And even the debates fig versus meat, rainwater versus well, have an oddly soothing rhythm. You're beginning to see why they took such pride in it. You think about all the hands that have stirred. These pots tested these formulas, ruined perfectly good fig. And for a moment, you realize that something as mundane as soap holds a kind of slow, quiet magic one that doesn't shout but whispers as it cures. You lean back, the stones cool beneath you, your thoughts drifting like the scent of olive, oil and ash rising gently through the darkening sky. You wake all, maybe you never fully slept, to the soft scuff of sandals on stone. The room has changed. The molds that were once covered in cloth have been unwrapped, revealing vast, firm sheets of soap, the color of pale parchment. They glisten faintly in the low morning light, like slabs of polished stone left out in the brain. Someone's sharpening a knife. Not a threatening one. Mind you, just a broad, flat blade perfect for slicing 100 squares of scientific goo into future cleanliness. This is the cutting stage. It's deceptively simple, but weirdly satisfying to watch. One man walks slowly along the mold's edge, scoring faint guidelines with a string. Another follows with the knife, gliding through the semi-solid block like he's trimming warm butter. The result, dozens, sometimes hundreds of rectangular soap bricks, each one firm but yielding, fresh but not ready. Now, here's the twist. Cutting the soap isn't just about portioning. It's also about timing. You see, if you cut too early, the soap's still sticky inside it, warps, bends, won't hold shape. Cut too late, and the bar hardens into a stubborn slab that crumbles. Along the edges, you watch as the knife guy pauses to run his finger down one slice's corner, nodding with the calm satisfaction of someone who has been doing this for years and still somehow enjoys it. Here's your historical fact to tuck into bed with. In Aleppo, arguably the world capital of this processed soap, was traditionally cut into bricks, about 10 centimeters wide and stacked in high pyramids to cure. These pyramids were more than practical drying racks. They became iconic symbols of the city's identity, as recognizable as its minarets or spice markets. Travelers wrote about them. Poets mentioned them. Soap pyramids were Aleppo's gentle skyscrapers. But, of course, that's not all. Once cut, these soap bricks had to cure for weeks, sometimes months, before they were ready to be used or sold. This wasn't just for texture or hardness. The aging process mellowed the lye, allowing the soap to become gentler, more aromatic, more refined. In fact, freshly made soap was almost never used immediately. You needed patience. Spend a lot of dry shelf space. You follow the workers into the next chamber, sort of airy, sunlit hall with wooden slats running the length of the walls. This is the curing room. It smells cleaner here, lighter, a mix of green olives, chalk, and thyme. Rows of soap bricks are stacked with deliberate gaps between them, letting air pass gently over each surface. The workers move through the rows like gardeners tending to silent plants. Now for your fringe tidbit. In some Ottoman cities, certain soap workshops hired soap whisperers. These weren't officially called that, of course, but that's essentially what they did, men, and occasionally women, whose job was to visit the curing stacks and gently rotate or tap the bars, checking for inconsistencies in color, texture, or smell. Some claimed they could tell by the weight of the bar alone whether it would crack in 3 weeks or bloom with scent. You roll your eyes, but then again, you're also kind of impressed. You watch as one apprentice reaches into a middle row and flips a bar over with 2 fingers. He gives it a sniff, frowns slightly, then places it in a separate tray. "Too moist," he mutters. Another bar is removed entirely. It had developed a tiny bloom of white on one side. Not mold, thankfully, but salt efflorescence. Still not ideal. Into the rejects bin it goes, destined to be reboiled, reshaped, and given another chance at cleanliness. Here's where the scholarly tension bubbles up again. Historians still argue whether the curing methods used in Ottoman soap houses were standardized or wildly regional. Some documents suggest strict rules about timing, humidity, and turning schedules. Others show almost no consistency, implying it was all passed down orally, tweaked by local climate, tradition, or whim. The truth, like most things in the past, probably lies somewhere in the foggy middle dot. As you wander deeper into the drying hall, you start to feel the rhythm of it all. A slow shift from soft to hard, from raw to refined. It's not unlike cheese aging or wine resting in barrels. Quiet transformation measured in weeks and whispers. You pause beside a tall stack of bars arranged in a neat grid, each brick stamped with a circular seal. You run your fingers across one. The logo reads like a family name curved Arabic script, elegant and looping. Branding was important even back then. Some soap makers marked their wares not just for pride, but for accountability. If your batch gave someone a rash or crumbled into chalk dust, your seal was there as proof and maybe as a target. You notice another pile in the corner, bars wrapped in waxy cloth and tied with twine. These are bound for trade. Some will go to Cairo, others to Istanbul. A lucky few might make it as far as Venice or Marseille. Ottoman soap was an export commodity, carried across deserts and seas in the bellies of camels and cargo ships. It was durable, light, valuable. And, unlike some medieval perfumes, it didn't spoil. Now, just to keep your eyelids heavy, Ottoman tax records from the 18th century listed soap not only as a trade good, but occasionally as an official gift in diplomatic exchanges. Imagine a sultan sending crates of artisanal Aleppo soap as a peace offering. Not quite as flashy as a golden dagger, but a lot more practical. Here, he might have said, "Use this, you'll feel better." As the day winds on and the sun shifts across the curing hall, the workers slowly pack up. The stacks are left to rest. Pew sit on a stool near the window, watching the way the dust motes hang in the air, drifting lazily over the rows of scented bricks. The warmth, the quiet, the endless neatness sits almost hypnotic. You could stay here forever, or at least can, till your skin feels a bit too clean, and your dreams smell faintly of olives. The sun has slipped low by now, brushing the rooftops in gold, and you follow the scent trail into a smaller chamber tucked behind the main workshopper room that smells sharper. This is where things get personal, because what's the point of clean if you can't make it smell like something? Welcome to the perfuming room, or, as the apprentice you just brushed past jokingly muttered, the room where noses go to fight. There's a heavy table in the center, scattered with tiny ceramic bowls and glass vials corked shut with beeswax. Each one holds a different scent: crushed rose petals, dried lavender, bitter orange rind, clove dust, sandalwood scrapings, and more than one mysterious brown resin that you're told not to ask about. You watch a younger worker grind dried myrtle, leaves into a fine powder, adding it to a small bowl of warm water steeped with fig milk. Another one drops what looks like a string of raisins into a boiling pot. It's labdanum, a sticky plant resin scraped from the beards of goats that graze in certain Mediterranean bushes. Glamorous? No. Effective? Yes. And exactly the kind of fringe tidbit that will haunt your dreams. The Ottomans, like many empires before and after them, understood that scent was more than a luxury. It was identity, medicine, even diplomacy. A soap's smell wasn't just a treat. It was a message. This is who we are. This is what we value. Rose, prestige, basil, cleanliness, musk, sensuality. And if your soap maker had access to imported spices from India or North Africa, your bath could smell like 5 trade routes converging in a single bowl. Here comes your official fact, warm and wrapped like a scented cloth. Ottoman soap makers often consulted as professional perfumers when composing their blends. These attars had their own shops, their own guilds, and recipes they guarded like state secrets. Some were even invited to court to present custom blends to the Sultan's inner circle. If your perfume made the concubines swoon, you could gain powerful patrons. If it made someone sneeze, well, back to goat resin for you. You watch a small vial being uncorked, and a thick stream of dark oil drips into a mixing bowl. One of the rarest and most expensive oils in the world, extracted from arga wood, infected with mold. Yes, infected, The magic of rot, it turns out, smells like heaven to the right nose. As the oils mix into the soap base, you realize this isn't random. The workers wear gloves, measure everything precisely, drops, pinches, smears and stir with the care of alchemists, bear matching fragrance to base. Olive oil soap takes scent differently than laurel-based blends. Some oils overpower, some fade too quickly. A good blend, that's the goal. A great one, that's legacy. There's a heated discussion happening near the far table too. Soap makers arguing whether a summer-cured bar should use more rose or more narrowly. You lean closer. One insists that summer bars dry too fast, losing scent unless anchored with a bass note. The other insists that heavier scents ruin the lightness of a summer batch. It's charming, intense, deeply nerdy. Historians still argue whether scent formulations were governed by seasonal science or just stubborn preferences. You notice a small board in the corner of the room with names and symbols chalked in. These are test batches, each one marked with initials, dates, and a tiny symbol maybe, a flower, maybe a moon. These are the apprentice blends. Most will never leave this room. A few might earn a place in the next curing pyramid. One might even get a stamp dot. Suddenly, you realize something. This entire craft is full of invisible hands. Not just the ones you see now, mixing and stirring and arguing, but generations of them. Each tweak, each argument over bass notes is a conversation happening across centuries. You're watching a debate that started before Shakespeare was born. Bend still hasn't been settled. A perfumer places a freshly scented bar beneath your nose. It's warm, soft, faintly floral, and something else, something earthy, almost like tree bark after rain. You inhale, exhale, and in that quiet breath, you understand why some people call scent the memory sense. This bar might outlast empires. It might cross seas. It might sit on a shelf in someone's linen closet 5 years from now, releasing this same quiet whisper of history. Here's your quirky detail of the day. Some Ottoman brides were gifted soap bars infused with personalized scent signature blends, prepared in advance and wrapped in embroidered cloth. The idea that her new home would always carry a trace of her past, a scent trail leading back to her family. Her mother's rosewater, her father's lemon balm, a quiet fingerprint of where she came from. You close your eyes a moment and try to imagine what your scent would be. Maybe olive oil and book pages. Maybe a touch of fig and sarcasm. Whatever it is, you're starting to feel it swirl around you now. The room has gone softer. The sun outside has tipped its final rays into the alley, and the workers begin bottling the leftover oils for tomorrow's batch. The perfuming is done for today. You follow the scent trail out into the night, past rows, up stacked bars, past sleepy dogs curled under stone steps, past the last hint of steam escaping from a back window. The air smells clean now, touched with orange blossom and wood smoke. You carry that fragrance with you, tucked into your coat, like a secret. The street is quieter now, with only the echo of your steps against ancient cobblestones. But the soap house doesn't sleep. It never really does. And tonight, you're following one of the older masters, yes. The same one who muttered something about goat resin down a narrow staircase that dips beneath the main workroom. The air gets cooler, heavier. There's a sharp, metallic temps riding on the scent of drying soap. This is the lye cellar. It's dim down here, lit only by small glass lanterns that swing faintly from rusty hooks. The floor is packed earth, damp. In places, you can hear dripping. Somewhere in the darkness, water trickles down into a stone basin lined with ash. It's not much to look at, really a shallow depression filled with sludge, but this is where the real transformation begins. You remember the lye we mentioned earlier, right? That alkaline magic that makes fats think, hey, maybe I'll be soap today. Well, this is where it's born. And the process is, let's say, charmingly rustic. Ash is the key, specifically ash from burned hardwoods, which Ottoman soapmakers prefer because of their higher potassium content. That's your historical fact, by the way. Ash from burned olive branches was especially prized because it carried both symbolism and science. The tree of peace, helping people stay clean. The ash is piled into large cones, often mixed with bits of lime or chalk. Then water is poured over. It slowly, very slowly until it seeps through, drawing out the soluble potassium salts. The resulting liquid is thick, brownish, and highly alkaline. That's lye water. Technically, it's potassium hydroxide. Practically, it's a caustic mess that will burn your skin, blind your eyes, and still somehow ends up making the gentlest soap your grandmother ever used. Here's your quirky tidbit for this stretch of candlelit, underground time. Some soap makers believed the moon affected their lye. No, seriously. They timed the pouring of ash water to correspond with waxing moons, thinking the increasing light would pull strength from the ash. Was it science? Debatable. Was it ritual? Absolutely. Was anyone going to argue with a man wielding both fire and caustic fluid? Probably not. You're shown a jugger battered clay thing that's been stained with years of chemical work. The lye inside swirls lazily as it's poured, steaming faintly. It hisses when it touches stone. The master dips a strip of parchment into it, watches it bubble slightly, then nods. He says something about perfect bite. You assume that's a good thing. Historians still argue whether the precise composition of lye water was standardized or determined purely by touch and tradition. Some documents suggest soap makers used rudimentary pH testing, dipping strips of wool, or tasting tiny drops on the tip of a reed. Don't try that at home. Others believe it was all feel, memory, and inherited instinct. Back upstairs, the lye is carefully mixed with the oils, just as you'd seen earlier. But now you understand the danger behind the elegance. This isn't just a kitchen experiment. It's controlled alchemy. Too much lye, and your soap burns skin. Too little, and the fat stays greasy. spoiling in storage. The perfect ratio, achieved by generations of patient trial and error. You sit by a corner of the cellar, letting your fingers run across a row of old amphorae once used to store prepared lye. Their insides are glazed smooth, protecting them from corrosion. Each is marked with a symbol: stars, crescents, triangles used, long before standardized Arabic numerals were adopted in the guilds. A secret code of recipes passed down like spells. There's another secret you learn in the flicker of lamplight. Not all lye was created on site. Some soap makers imported special alkaline earths from other regions, volcanic ash from the Aegean Islands, for instance, believing them to be more potent, more sacred, or just easier to work with. Trade records from Bursa and Edom show small but consistent purchases of white stone salt delivered in jute sacks. Those salts, when dissolved, made a softer lye, but one that gave the soap a creamier texture. You feel a little awestruck. Now, this isn't medieval guesswork. It's empirical chemistry disguised as folk wisdom. They might not have had lab coats, but they had controlled experiments, comparative methods, and centuries of data baked into every instinct. As the workers finish for the night, the lye is locked away in sealed jars. No one wants to risk a spill, even among seasoned hands. The air is cooler now, and you follow the others back upstairs, blinking into the softer light of oil lamps. Before the master leaves, he says something to a younger apprentice. Something, thou listening to the water. You don't catch all the words, but the tone is patient, almost reverent. And that's the real takeaway, for all its danger. This part of the soap-making process demands gentleness, observation, slowness. You step outside for a moment, just to clear your head. The night air tastes cleaner somehow. Maybe it's the faint scent of ash and lemon drifting from the workshop. Maybe it's just the contrast with the pungent cellar. Either way, you take a breath deep enough to fill your ribs and stare at the moon, waxing just like they like it. You might not be a soap maker yet, but tonight you definitely understand why they whispered to their barrels. You head back inside. Clap now, just as someone opens a creaky wooden door to reveal what looks like a storage room, but once you step in, you realize it's much more than that. This is the records room. And yes, it smells like old paper, candle smoke, and a hint of bay leaf, which feels weirdly appropriate. The shelves along the walls sag under the weight of bound ledgers, scraps of parchment, and cloth-wrapped bundles that look like they haven't been touched since the last sultan shaved. No one talks much here. The space feels holy in its own way. You can hear the soft tick of a lantern swinging above, and the faintest whisper of pages turning. A young scribe is hunched at a desk, copying a recipe in careful Ottoman script, dipping his reed pen into ink made from soot and gum, Arabic. You watch the loop of his letters, almost like vines curling around each other. This is where the formulas live. Not just the general ones passed from master to apprentice, but the detailed ones. Recipes tailored for different skin types, Climates, social classes. One for barbers who wanted soap that made blades glide smoothly. One for palace bathhouses, where the steam was thick and the floors were marble. One for foot soldiers needing a quick clean paste before prayer. Each line reads like a poem of fats and fragrances. Laurel oil, 2 parts. Lye, strong, half part. Bay infusion, a whisper. Your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman soap makers were required by guild law to document their recipes, if they intended, to pass them on through sale or inheritance. These ledgers were reviewed during inspections by the Cathuda or guild steward. If your records were sloppy, your shop could be fined or worse, your stamp revoked. It was bookkeeping with teeth. And now, for your oddity of the evening, one of the wrapped bundles you open contains hair, human hair, tied with a blue ribbon and dated 300 years ago. Apparently, some soap makers kept locks of their apprentices' hair, soaked in different soap blends, to test how well the product softened or strengthened it over time. Hair, it seems, was the original lab rat, unsettling, a bit effective. Arguably, you pull out another ledger, its spine brittle, the ink faded to a sleepy brown. Inside are sketches, not just of soap molds, but of hand positions, stirring directions, even airflow diagrams drawn with exaggerated swirls. The writer clearly had opinions. You find a whole page dedicated to a rant about lazy, clockwise stirring, ruining batch consistency. It's oddly charming. You can hear the sarcasm across centuries. This scribe would have made a great YouTuber. As you leaf through more records, you notice little symbols tucked in the margins, tiny stars, crescents, birds, coded notes, personal bookmarks. Historians still argue whether these marks represented quality grades, secret ingredient codes, or just bored scribes doodling between batches. The truth probably includes a little of each. The air in here feels different, not heavy, exactly just full. Full of voices, of hands that moved with intent, of lives that revolved around lye, oil, scent, and soap. There's something oddly intimate about these records. Not just lists, but legacies. You feel like you're eavesdropping on old arguments, victories, quiet failures. In one ledger, you find a recipe labeled simply for winter skin. It includes tallow, fig sap, and beeswax ingredients that would have made a creamier, more protective soap. Another, for plague weeks, has strong vinegars, garlic extract, and a mystery compound, simply noted as from Tarsus. Is it medicinal? Is it superstition? You could argue both. The point is, someone took the time to test it, write it, save it. There's a strange beauty in this silent archive. No shouting, no fires, just ink and memory. You realize the records room isn't just about past recipes. It's about future-proofing. If a master died suddenly, his apprentice could carry on. If a war disrupted oil supplies, alternate blends were ready. Knowledge stored not in heads, but in neat lines of Ottoman Turkish, smudged with candle wax and the oil of 1,000 fingertips. The scribe at the table finally stands and stretches, his back cracking softly. He nods to you as he leaves, and the room shifts again just you now, surrounded by shelf after shelf of formulas. You think about how many bars of soap each of these pages represents. Thousands, tens of thousands, each one melted, lathered, rinsed away, and yet the paper remains. Pause at the doorway and look back one last time. The ledgers breathe quietly on the shelves. Some of them haven't been opened in a century. Others are still in use. You imagine one being consulted tomorrow morning, 100-year-old recipe, coming back to life in a copper pot. There's something magical in that. Something clean and orderly, sure, but also quietly eternal. Back in the hallway, your footsteps feel louder after so much silence. You notice a faint smudge of ink on per your thumb, and it makes you smile. By a little fingerprint of someone else's work. Someone long gone, who once cared enough to write down which way to stir the pot. You make your way through a narrow side corridor now, following the murmur of voices and the rhythmic thump of something. Soft hitting wood. The air grows warmer again, tinged with lavender and warm oil. You push aside a faded curtain and step into a room that feels like it's breathing. This is the shaping room. If the boiling chambers were thunder and steam, and the records room was whispering ink, then this is all touch. Rows of wooden tables stretch across the floor, each one bearing loaves of soap that glisten faintly in the lantern glow. Some are soft and pliable, newly poured and still settling. Others are firm, cool to the touch, their surfaces etched with faint knife lines. The room is filled with workers, and not one of them is rushing. They move slowly, carefully, like sculptors or bakers, molding soap blocks into uniform perfection. This is where the raw mixture, once cured and cooled, is sliced, shaped, and stamped. Your mainstream historical fact here is that Ottoman soapmakers used custom-carved wooden molds and stamps to give their soaps consistent size, shape, and guild-certified marks. These stamps weren't just decorative. They were a guarantee of quality and source. A stamped bar of soap meant someone stood behind its recipe, and that someone didn't want to be publicly shamed for subpar bubbles. You approach a table where a worker with ink-black hair is lining up square blocks, each one identical, like bricks for a fragrant wall. He dips his hands in water before each cut, helps reduce drag, he says, and keeps the surface smooth. You watch as he brings down a long, fine-edged blade with precision, each slice accompanied by a wet thump and a soft sigh of movement. It's hypnotic, Dot. Then the stamps come out. These are little works of art. Circles, squares, sunbursts, some with floral patterns, others with pure calligraphy. The most respected soap makers had their own emblems carved into brass or walnut wood, passed down like family heirlooms. A good stamp didn't just identify the maker, it became a status symbol. Oh, you're using the crescent flower soap. Fancy, quirky detail for this room. Some soap makers added tiny bits of colored thread or crushed minerals to mark different types of soap. A strand of blue silk meant lavender scented. A speck of gold, dust real, or fake, meant luxury grey, usually reserved for elite bath or royal gifts. You imagine some poor guy sneezing glitter for a week after that shift. The debate still swirling among historians, whether these stamping methods were standardized across cities, or whether regional pride got in the way. Istanbul favored square cuts with center-lined stamps. Aleppo preferred rounded cakes with edge marks. Some scholars argue this difference. More's about drying speed and story. Others think it was pure guild politics soap snobbery, if you will. Our corners are rounder than yours might have actually been a thing. You move toward another table where an apprentice is gently smoothing the edges of each bar with a damp cloth. For show, he says shyly, but then grins. Also so they don't crumble like bad cheese. You run your fingers along the edges of a freshly shaped soap. It's warm, just a little, and smells faintly of lemon balm and aged wood. You kind of want to bite it. You don't, but the temptation is real. Along one wall are trays stacked high with soaps left to dry. Some are a week old, others a month. The longer they cure, the harder they get, and the better they lather. Soap left to wet spoils. Left to dry, it cracks. There's a sweet spot, and it takes real judgment to find it. You overhear two workers arguing softly about whether the batch near the window should be rotated. One says the breeze helps it age evenly. The other thinks the sun might bleach the outer layer. You decide not to intervene. Soap politics sound delicate. There's a small shelf by the back wall, filled with oddly shaped pieces bars that didn't quite mold right, or cut unevenly, or came out with strange bubbles. These are the orphans, the apprentice tells you. Some are kept for private use, others are melted back down and reshaped. Nothing is wasted here, not even the ugly ones. You spot a tiny barno, bigger than your thumb, with a single word stamped across it. Sabir. Patience. You ask if it was a joke. The apprentice nods. Our master made that for himself. Said it was the most important ingredient. Outside, you hear a rooster crowing, oddly timed, but strangely comforting. A breeze rolls in through the high windows, stirring the scent of dozens of soap varieties, some floral, some earthy, a few sharp enough to tickle your sinuses. The room is a collage of texture and smell, and you feel oddly like you could stay here a while. Maybe grab a stamp, roll up your sleeves, and line up a few bars of your own. But for now, you just watch. The stamping continues, soft and rhythmic, a kind of lullaby carved in oil and ash. Another soap maker dips her fingers in rosewater before stamping her next batch just a touch for luck. Her hands move with a grace that only repetition can give, and as she presses her emblem into each bar, you realize something. Every mark, every edge, every scent is a story, and tonight you're lucky enough to witness it before it disappears into the bath, steam of someone centuries away. By now, your feet have grown used to the warm stone floors, and the scents clinging to your sleeves are a quiet parade of olive, smoke, and something floral that lingers without a name. You follow the gentle rattle of wheels over stone to a smaller courtyard where the sun hits the tiles like a blessing. Here, open racks are lined with bars of soaps and pails, some golden, a few in rich, olive brown tones laid out neatly like drying fruit. This is the curing courtyard, the last stop before these humble little bricks of cleanliness meet the hands of bathers, barbers, or royalty. You breathe in deeply. The air is dry and almost sterile in its clarity, as though the soap is doing its job just by being here. An older man with weathered hands is checking the racks, tapping the corners of each soap bar with a practiced knuckle knock. He doesn't explain the sound he's listening for, but you get the sense it's like tuning a drum sharp. Tap means it's dry. Dull thud means leave it a while. Here's your mainstream fact. Ottoman soap makers relied heavily on air drying to cure their soaps, sometimes for as long as 2 months. Curing reduced moisture, hardened the bars, and improved the lathering experience. No rush jobs were allowed if you sold uncured soap. The guild would fine you for being a menace to armpits and reputations alike. But while air curing was standard, how it was done varied wildly. That brings us to tonight's quirky tidbit. Some soap makers believed that singing to curing soap helped balance the spirit of the batch. Yes, really. There are travel accounts from the 17th century mentioning workers humming folk tunes while shifting racks from sun to shade, like singing bakers rotating loaves. Maybe it kept the rhythm of labor consistent. Maybe it just passed the time. Either way, these soap loaves had their own lullabies. You walk between rows of racks, careful not to disturb the alignment. Each batch has a labeler sliver of parchment or dyed cloth tag noting the date, the recipe, the maker. You reach out to touch one, and it's warm from the sun but firm, like polished wood. You lift it to your nose, lemon and dara in message stream. Lemon and ash, with just a breath of something herbal beneath it. Maybe thyme, maybe dried fig, leaf. You're not entirely sure, but whatever it is, it smells like summer in a garden with no clocks. The kind of scent that sticks to memory more than fabric. You gently place the bar back in line, as if any misstep might disrupt its final transformation. As you continue walking between the rows, you notice how each section of the courtyard is angled just slightly enough to catch the right blend of sun and breeze, without scorching the surface. The racks are handmade, 2 wooden frames with woven reeds or thin cords stretched across them like hammocks for the soap. The design helps airflow underneath, speeding up the evaporation of leftover moisture while keeping the bars level and crack-free. Now, about that ongoing scholarly debate, historians are still puzzling over the exact conditions believed to produce the perfect cure. Some records suggest soap makers avoided curing during full moons, claiming the moisture in the air rose with the tides. Others swore by aligning the racks to face Mecca, saying spiritual orientation strengthened the bar's integrity. Was this faith, San, convenient architecture, or just a charming superstition no one dared to question. Probably a little of all three. Like most old wisdom, it lived somewhere between evidence and ritual. One soap maker hums softly nearby, moving through the rows with a gentle gait. He reaches under a rack and pulls out a forgotten bark rat, misshapen and slightly paler than the rest. With a shrug, he drops it into a basket labeled mekru, which roughly means undesirable. Not forbidden, just not ideal. That bar will probably be melted and reshaped later, or used for household cleaning. Nothing gets truly wasted. Another man is misting a few trays with a sprayer made from a repurposed gourd. The liquid smells faintly of rosewater and vinegar to keep the bugs off, he explains without looking up, and to remind the soap it's meant to be kissed. Buy flowers, not flies. That poetic explanation earns him a few chuckles from nearby workers, but you can tell he half believes it, maybe more than half. You pass a row labeled for the caravan, and something shifts in your curiosity. These aren't the glossy bars for palaces or bathhouses. They're bulkier, duller, made in rough rectangular molds, and cut with thick lines. Treble soap, functional, sturdy, packed for merchants, pilgrims, and camel drivers who might not wash again for 3 cities. You pick one up. It smells faintly medicinal, like vinegar and pine, probably doubled as a wound cleanser in a pinch. A whisper of wind tugs at your sleeves, and you pause to soak in the peace of it all. It's not just a place for drying, it's a place for waiting. No fire here, no mixing, no stamping, just patience. The quiet part of the soap's journey, where change happens invisibly, kind of like bread rising in a bowl, or paint drying into art. On one wall, a faded chalkboard lists dates, when each rack was filled, and when it's expected to be ready. Some lines have been wiped and rewritten, others long past their time. Tell linger as ghostly numbers. You wonder if someone forgot them, or if they're left there as reminders of something less practical. Maybe a memory tied to a specific batch. Maybe a bar that cured while someone fell in love or mourned a loss. One apprentice carries a large bundle of soap bars inside off to the wrapping room. You decide to follow, but not before glancing back at the rows of patient little bricks put under the sky. It's strange to think that something so ordinary so easily washed away, given such reverent space to become itself. Not rushed, not forced, just trusted to harden, strengthen, and scent the air for a little while longer. As you step back into shadow, you notice your hands now smell like lemon, pine, and heat. It's comforting, not perfumed, not fancy, just clean, in the most old-world, elemental sense of the word. Reflects your fingers, the scent rising faintly from your skin like incense from a cold stone burner. And with that, you leave the courtyard behind, drying racks still basking, slowly transforming under the slow hum of the afternoon, carrying with them centuries of softness, precision. And you follow the apprentice through a narrow corridor, where dust motes float like sleeping spirits in the golden light. The hum of conversation is low here, nearly reverent, and you soon step into a room filled with texture, baskets of linen, stacks of parchment, coils of twine. This is the wrapping and packaging area, the soap's final stop before entering the world. It smells different here. Less of oil and more of ink, paper, and glue. Breathe in deeply and detect something faintly woody, perhaps sandalwood, or just the well-aged scent of a room that's been handling fragrant things for hundreds of years. You rub your fingers against the edge of a table and come away with a dusting of fine powder, maybe chalk, maybe crushed herb, maybe the whisper of soap itself. Each table holds a different task. One corner is dedicated to cutting parchment squares with wooden stamps that slice in perfect curves, like pastry, molds. Another is devoted to the delicate art of calligraphy. Someone is labeling bars with the name of the maker, the scent, and often the season the soap was made. Spring batch, rose and bay, one label reads. Winter olive, double boiled, says another. Here's your mainstream fact. Ottoman soap makers often wrapped their finest soaps in decorative parchment or silk, especially those intended as gifts or for sale at elite markets. Packaging was both art and advertisement first. Propression that could mean the difference between being used or being displayed like treasure. In fact, the highest quality Aleppo soap was sometimes presented in hand-painted wooden boxes lined with dried flowers. Yes, someone out there once unwrapped a bar of soap as if it were a jewel. And your quirky tidbit for this stretch. Some soap makers wrote poems to accompany their luxury soaps short. Verses copied onto slips of paper and tucked inside the wrapping like fortune cookie scrolls. These weren't mass-printed. Each one was handwritten, often by a literate apprentice or a local scribe paid in product. One discovered example read, "May your hands find ease, and the scent soothe your sleep as softly as olives sing in spring." Not bad for a bathroom product. Historians still debate whether these poems were purely decorative or whether they were tied to spiritual beliefs. Some scholars think they were intended to bless the soap, making it more than just clean. It became a talisman of well-being. Others argue that it was just clever marketing in a time when few people could read, but those who could held the purse strings. A perfumed soap that also whispered a sweet line of poetry. That's ancient influencer culture right there. You pause by a table where a woman is folding each bar into a square of parchment, then sealing it with a dollop of beeswax. She presses a metal ring into the wax, leaving the impression of her maker's mark, a tulip inside a crescent moon. The wax is faintly tinted red with crushed cochineal, and it glows gently in the low light. It feels like watching a ritual more than a routine. Across the room, another table has wrapped bars being tied with thin cords, dyed saffron yellow. A boy with clever fingers finishes each knot with a little loop knot for hanging, but for elegance. You notice one box packed for deliver it, lined with rosemary sprigs and fennel seeds, probably to keep insects out during transport. but it adds a visual charm too. You realize someone, somewhere, will open this box and see not just soap but a forest of clean dot. There are mistakes, of course. A bar wrapped too tightly cracks along one edge. A stamp goes on crooked, a wax seal puts smudges in the rush. These are quietly removed and placed into the market pile, good enough to sell, but not perfect enough to give. Even soap, apparently, has its class system. A door at the far end of the room opens to a small courtyard where crates are stacked, each one stamped with the name of the soap makers' guild. Some are heading to the palace, others to caravanserais that line the Silk Road routes. One crate bears a faint tag in a foreign hand Italian, maybe indicating it's bound for Venice. That's your subtle reminder. Ottoman soap wasn't just local. It was exported, prized, sometimes even imitated. You wouldn't know it, standing in this quiet workshop. But some of these little bars were once luxury imports across the Mediterranean. You linger for a moment, watching as one of the apprentices gently wipes a final bar with a linen cloth, places it into a lined tray, and closes the lid with a soft click. A simple sound, but it lands like punctuation, a full stop on the soap's journey. From olive to lye to loaf to label, you walk back through the room slowly, fingers brushing across twine, across parchment edges, across bars still cooling before their last embrace. One worker hums under her breath, another writes a final poem. For the day's last bar, for skin, for soul, for sleep, it begins. And for a moment, the whole room feels hushed not with fatigue, but with satisfaction. The work is done, the soap is ready, and you lucky wanderer, that you have seen it from the scent, follows you as you step out of the wrapping room. Rosewater, olive ink, and wax mingling gently on your clothes, like a whisper of where you've been. The sun is lower now, casting long stripes of gold and shadow across the workshop floors. But your guide, a cheerful middle-aged soap master with a beard like soft rope, insists there's still one more place to see before the day winds down. The soap library, he says, grinning as if he's sharing a secret. Yes, we keep our best mistakes. He leads you down a quieter corridor, past storerooms lined with spare wooden molds and aging barrels of aged lye. The corridor ends at a thick door, slightly warped with age, painted in deep green. When it creaks open, you step into a cool, dim space that smells more like a spice cellar than a laboratory. Rows of small wooden drawers stretch across the walls, each labeled with careful ink, Spring Batch, 1671, Sun-Dried Rose, Failed Saponification, Experiment, Camel Milk. This, as it turns out, is the Guild's experimental archive, a museum of soap making, if you will accept, instead of sculptures and scrolls, there are bars, hundreds of bars, all organized by year, ingredients, maker, bow, and outcome. Some are crumbling fossils, others are preserved under glass, perfectly intact. Some are even wrapped in cloth, like they've been tucked in for a very long nap. Here's your mainstream fact. Ottoman guilds, especially in major cities like Aleppo and Istanbul, kept surprisingly detailed records of their craft. Recipes, weather conditions, measurements, and even moon phases were logged when preparing key batches. These weren't just soap makers, they were protochemists, and they treated their failures with the same reverence as their successes. A bar that didn't lather right might still teach a valuable lesson. Your quirky tidbit, one preserved bar, in the library is rumored to have been made using olive oil, blessed by a wandering dervish. The maker swore it cured skin ailments and brought vivid dreams. It's displayed on a carved pedestal, slightly cracked with time, but still emitting a faint scent, something smoky and sweet. Historians haven't agreed on whether the dervish story is real or just old marketing wrapped in spiritual flair. But the bar's presence here has been unquestioned for generations. Superstition, science, or showmanship, take your pick. You're invited to examine a few samples up close. A brittle bar from 1584 that disintegrated when wet. A strangely green batch from 1742 that foamed too aggressively and was deemed spiritually unstable in the notes. You chuckle at that phrase. Somewhere along the way, someone decided a soap could have too much enthusiasm. In the center of the room, there's a long table for active experimentation. It's not in use right now, but you spot faded notations along the edge. Excess soda, ruined fragrance, Hachiu Cinco Dois, unyielded bitter foe, never trust summer basil. By charming chaos of wisdom and warning. You imagine a group of soap makers leaning over this very table, arguing gently over whether the goat milk batch needed more cooling time or less whispering, or both. There's one drawer slightly ajar, and you can't help but peep. Inside is a row of oddly shaped bars, some lopsided, others flecked with herbs. One clearly stamped with a cat's paw. Someone wrote on a slip of parchment, "Apprentice batch, unsupervised." It feels like finding a failed science fair project tucked away with affection. Mistakes weren't shameful here. They were documented, laughed over, and when safe repurposed. Now comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these experimental archives were used for teaching or were just the eccentric habits, view of obsessive masters. Some say they served as templates for innovation. Others claim they were kept only to ensure mistakes were never repeated. The truth is likely in the middle, because nothing says guild tradition quite like respecting both curiosity and caution in equal measure. You run your finger along one of the drawers and feel the smoothness of years gone by. There's no dust here, it's lovingly maintained. A soap maker's descendant, perhaps, or a present-day artisan, ensures these lessons remain touchable. And maybe a future apprentice will open a drawer, try a failed recipe again, and discover it was only waiting for the right humidity or a pinch more time. Your guide thanks you for visiting, and you thank him for keeping a record of all this lathered lore. As you step out of the archive, the door sighs shut behind you. and the smell of long-dried herbs, forgotten oils, and half-lost poetry clings to your thoughts like a dream you hope you don't forget. And so the soap's journey continues, not just in hands, but in memory, in drawers, in quiet rooms where even failure smells a little bit like triumph. Outside the archive, the evening air feels cooler now. The sun is slipping low over the tiled rooftops, and shadows stretch long and quiet across the courtyard flagstones. Bipan, you move slowly, now partly because your feet are tired, and partly because the entire place seems to have shifted into a slower gear. The soap makers are winding down their day, but there's one final rhythm to witness: the guild's evening gathering. You follow your guide once more through a back hallway and into a small, open-air terrace, bordered with low wooden benches. Lanterns have been lit, their light flickering gently against the walls like candlelight caught in water. A brazier smokes lightly in the center, filling the space with the rich scent of burning figwood and a trace of myrrh. It's here, each evening, that the soap makers sit, sip warm drinks, and, of course, talk shop. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman craft guilds weren't just business collectives. They functioned like close-knit social systems. Members supported one another during illness, shared techniques, trained new apprentices, and even helped arrange marriages within the trade. Soap makers weren't loners. They were part of a fragrant fraternity, where loyalty mattered as much as lather. Tonight, the discussion seems gentle, almost teasing. One older master tells a story about a shipment of soap that melted during a particularly hot caravan journey, arriving at its destination as a single fused mass. They said it looked like a cheese wheel, he chuckles, but they sold it anyway, sliced it like pie. The group erupts in laughter, passing cups of warm tamarind tea from hand to hand. You're offered a cup to it, tastes sour and pleat with a hint of smoke, and leaves your mouth feeling mysteriously cleaner than before. Your quirky tidbit this time. One member claims he once crafted a bar of soap shaped like a fish, scented with anise, and gave it as a prank gift to a rival guild. The recipient, not realizing it was soap, attempted to cook it. The resulting stew, the storyteller says, cleansed more than just the pots. True, who knows? But the delivery earns such roaring laughter that you hope it's a little bit real. They speak about apprentices, some gifted, some impatient. One soapmaster recalls a student who tried to speed up, curing time with a cold stove. The batch exploded into flakes. Pitt, another, praises an apprentice who added crushed mint leaves to a summer blend and created a whole new line of invigorating morning soaps. You recognize the mix of affection and frustration in their voices. Like any good teacher, they know their craft survives only through the next pair of hands. The sky is darkening to a soft indigo, and lanterns glow brighter. A light breeze rustles the hanging herbs strung above the terrace: lavender, sage, marjoram. It's peaceful here. You sit back, cup warm in your hands, listening as the group shifts from gossip to philosophy. One man muses that soap isn't Just cleanliness its memory. You can forget a face, he says, but scent that stays with you. Historians still argue whether guilds like this influenced larger scientific thought in the Ottoman world. Some claim the communal methods of testing and observation paved the way for more structured chemistry practices. Others insist these artisans stayed mostly within the realm of tradition, innovating only by intuition. But here, tonight, under the stars, those arguments feel distant. What matters is the smell of fig smoke, the taste of tamarind, and the soft chorus of voices weaving past and future together. Someone pulls out a small instrument. An old tambourine begins to play a gentle rhythm. Another starts singing a slow, wordless tune, barely louder than the wind. It's not performance. It's something older ritual, maybe. A way of closing the day, of thanking the olive trees and the river and the countless mistakes that somehow lead to better soap. You look around at the faces illuminated by firelight. Some are wrinkled with age, others smooth with youth, but all are softened by the same glow. You see hands calloused from years of stirring, lifting, molding. Hands that have, in their own quiet way, kept something ancient alive, not just through bars of soap, but through stories, songs, and shared breath. You close your eyes for a moment, just to listen, to feel the warmth of the fire, the hush of tired laughter, the deep, steady pulse of a craft older than anyone here. And for a moment, you're not a guest. You're part of the lathered lineage. Another soul carrying the scent forward ever. So gently, the stars are thick above the city now, winking faintly between ribbons of cloud. But instead of heading toward the guest quarters or awaiting bedroll, your guide beckons once more. One more thing, he says, his voice low and conspiratorial. Bescent vault. You blink, not quite sure you heard him right. But yes, there's a scent vault. And of course, there is. You've spent hours wandering through oils, olives, failures, experiments, and fragrant old poems. Why wouldn't there be a place devoted entirely to scent? He leads you along a corridor that dives beneath the workshop. Its stones cool beneath your steps. The air here shifts, less smoky, more still, like a cave or temple. You reach a heavy wooden door bound in iron, and he pulls it open with a grunt. It swings inward, revealing a circular chamber lined with dozens, no, hundreds of ceramic jars and tiny cloth-wrapped bundles. This is the vault where the rarest scents are kept. Oils so potent, so difficult to procure, that they are guarded. Like relics, rose oil from the first pressing, sandalwood aged for decades, resin gathered from a certain tree that only grows on a certain cliff, that only blooms in certain seasons. It's not just a storeroom, it's a sanctuary. Mainstream fact. Time. Scent was incredibly valuable in the Ottoman world, both economically and culturally. Perfumes, incense, and oils weren't just luxuries. They were gifts to guests, symbols of wealth, tools in trade, negotiations, and even ritual offerings. A merchant could cross continents with nothing more than a satchel of rare musk, and return rich. Scent was soft gold. You step closer to one jar, and your guide opens it for just a moment. Inside is ambergris, the mysterious substance formed in the stomach of a whale and used in perfumes across the empire. It smells odd, salty and sweet, unlike something you can't describe but would recognize forever after. The jar is closed again swiftly. Too much, your guide mutters. Your dream in loops, your quirky tidbit. One of the bundles here is labeled the Breath of Suleiman, and supposedly contains an oil blend created for the Sultan himself. The recipe includes rose, oud, and something simply labeled black citrus. No one quite knows what that is. Some say it was a spoiled orange. Others say it was a night-blooming fruit found only in palace gardens. Historians still argue whether the term was poetic or literal lore, if the label was added later by a merchant, hoping to bump the price. The room is arranged like a clock, with scents sorted by mood and purpose. Soothing on one side, lavender, chamomile, rice flower. Energizing on the other, mint, lemon, clove. In between, the complicated sense things that don't fit easily into human categories. Rain on stone, grief before a storm, smoke caught in silk. These aren't products, they're memory traps. You take a seat on the little stool in the center of the vault and just breathe. Slowly, the scents aren't overwhelming, no. Unless you open too many jars, but they settle into the air like drifting thought. Your own memories start to stir. A garden from childhood, the sleeve of a loved one's coat, the sharp tang of something you once wanted and never got. And then your guide hands you a small cloth bag. A gift, he says simply. Inside is a sliver of soap wrapped in linen. You unfold it and inhale. The scent is warm, nutty, and something like fig butt. Not quite. It smells like all the hours you've just spent. Like lie and laughter, firelight and time, poems and parchment, boiling oil and quiet jokes over tamarind tea. It smells impossibly like knowledge. The guide leaves you there for a while, sitting with the past in little clay pots. You're alone, but not lonely. The room hums with all the noses that came before yours, all the breaths and bets and blunders sealed into the oil-stained shelves. You understand now why they keep this vault hidden. It's not for protection, it's for reverence. This is where scent becomes memory, where cleanliness becomes art. When you finally rise, your fingers smell faintly of rose and resin. You take one last look at the room, nod in quiet thanks, and step back through the thick door, into the hallway, into the now dot above. The soap makers are beginning to close up for the night, but down here, the scents wait patiently, unchanging, eternal. The lanterns are dim now, their flames shrinking like sleepy eyes. The courtyard is nearly silent except for the soft scrape of sandals and the occasional creak of wood as shutters are latched. You're back above ground, led by instinct more than guidance, retracing the winding route past boiling pots and drying racks, back to where the day began. But you're not done yet. There's still the matter of the old ledger, tucked away. Behind the receiving hall is a small study, lit by a single oil lamp that flickers like it's nervous to be left alone. This room isn't used much anymore, too dusty, too fragile, but it holds the master records of the guild going back centuries. Recipes, letters, trade logs, and musings written in a dozen different hands. Some entries are neat and formal, others scribbled hastily, like someone trying to catch a thought before it slipped away. Here's your mainstream fact. Ottoman artisans were surprisingly literate and well documented, particularly those affiliated with guilds. Many were trained not only in their craft but in calligraphy and record keeping. These weren't just soap makers. They were thinkers, note takers, and sometimes even amateur philosophers. The guilds valued clarity. A soap batch might fail, but its story would be written down. Your guide opens one of the ledgers and invites you to flip through. The pages are thick, yellowed, and soft at the edges. You read entries like, "Spring wind disrupted the cooling process. Today batch, slightly bitter, noted. Prentice Hazen attempted lavender salt combo again. Smells like soup, must refine. Dreamt of a soap that sings when lathered. Must speak with alchemist." You stifle a laugh. That last one feels almost modern, like someone trying to launch a startup 2 centuries too early. Still, you admire the curiosity, the quiet boldness of dreaming out loud in a ledger no one might ever read. Your quirky tidbit. One entry in the ledger is written entirely in verse. Yes, a poem. A full sonnet dedicated to a single batch of rose myrtle soap. It reads like a love letter and ends with the line, "May she cleanse what I could not." No one knows who wrote it. There's no signature. Just a fading ink heart in the corner. Historians still argue whether this was a personal ode or a marketing stunt meant to enchant customers. Either way, it worked you feel enchanted. As you flip the pages, you come by across a hand-drawn map. It shows the trade routes used by the guild caravans that carried soap from the coast to the mountains. Then onward to Persia, Anatolia, even the far reaches of North Africa. Dotted along the routes are notes. Watch for spring floods. Tea house here has finest apricot pastry, and scent fades after 23 days in desert heat. You realize how much trial and error, how much human memory and grit went into every bar that ever left this place. And near the back of the ledger, tucked between pages like a secret, you find a pressed flower, a single sprig of marjoram, so dry it crumbles a little at the edge. There's no note explaining its presence, no reference in the margin, just a plant, fragile, forgotten, and still faintly aromatic. You close the book with care. It's heavier now, not in weight, but bime in presence. This isn't just a record, it's a soul, or maybe 1,000 souls, each one writing themselves into the margins of time outside. The wind picks up a little, curling around the doorframe like it's reading over your shoulder. The lamp flickers once, then settles. You glance at the gift. In your pocket, the linen-wrapped sliver of soap from the scent. Voltand, you understand what the guild has really preserved. Not just fragrance, not just technique, but thought, attention. That rare kind of patience that turns the ordinary fat, ash, water, into something sacred. You leave the room quietly, making sure the lamp stays lit. The night is deep now, but not cold. The stars seem closer than they were earlier, like they've descended a little, curious to see what you've seen. And just outside the study, sitting against a stone wall, an apprentice hums softly to himself as he sands the edge of a wooden mold. Even now, even at this hour, the soap continues. The hour is late. Even the wind sounds like it's trying to fall asleep, brushing lazily through the narrow alleys of the guild's quarter. You walk now with a slow certainty, every step softened by the weight of what you've seen, smelled, and heard. The soap have gone to bed. The fires are mostly out. Only a few coals remain in the great oven, glowing like buried treasure beneath the ash. And yet something still hums. You're drawn toward the workshop's back garden, yes. They have one, a modest rectangle of dirt and stone, nestled between high walls. But in the moonlight, it feels vast. Here, they grow their own herbs. Sage, mint, sometimes even rare blossoms, if they can coax them from the soil. Olive trees line one edge, their trunks twisted with age and intent. You take a seat on the low stone bench, surrounded by the night sounds of rustling leaves and the quietest trickle of water from a hidden basin. This is where the soap makers come, not to work, but to remember, to think, to ask questions that lie and oil can't answer. Mainstream fact. As promised, gardens like these were common in Ottoman homes and guild quarters. They weren't decorative, they were philosophical. A space where nature reminded craftsmen of pace, rhythm, patience. Soap couldn't be rushed, and neither could rosemary. Everything in balance, everything in time, your quirky bit. One soap master apparently once tried to harness the dew that gathered on sage leaves at dawn, claiming it held moon's breath. His apprentices watched him shuffle barefoot through the garden every morning, muttering verses and collecting droplets with a spoon. He claimed it made the soap smell like forgetting. The batch didn't sell, but he used it himself until the day he died. Historians still argue whether he was mad or just ahead of his time. From your seat, you look up at the walls surrounding the garden. Faint shadows dance across them, vines moving gently in the breeze, caught by the lanterns. Someone forgot to extinguish. Pew, imagine the ghosts of soap makers past, watching over this space, nodding approvingly at a good olive harvest or a particularly fragrant batch of thyme in a quiet corner. A flat stone slab bears a series of names, etched shallowly into the surface. It's not a monument, no marble, no grandeur, just name, likely the founders of the guild, or perhaps those who passed without students to carry on their formulas. But their names remain, soft as lather, steady as soap. You take one last deep breath. The air smells of mint and damp stone. Your fingers trail through the soil beside the bench, brushing against tiny sprouts you can't quite identify. And then, without thinking, you unwrap your gift from the vault, just for a moment. You hold the little soap sliver beneath your nose and breathe, pit in, and that's when everything returns. The boiling pots, the Guildhall banter, the scent vault and the sonnet in the ledger, the laughter, the tamarind tea, the flicker of flame across a wall lined with oil bottles. It all rushes back in one impossible inhale. You don't smile, but your chest lifts like it might, like your lungs understand, something your words can't yet touch. The garden watches quietly as you rewrap the soap and tuck it away. You rise slowly, like one waking from a long, fragrant dream. You leave the garden behind, the stone bench still warm where you sat. Tomorrow, the soap makers will rise early. They'll begin the day by stirring vats and trimming bars. But for now, the guild sleeps, and you carry the story on your skin, in your breath, in the lather that memory makes. The story is complete now. The fires are out. The walls of the guild stand still and silent, their stones holding the heat of long-forgotten summers and the scent of oils that haven't been used in generations. You walk away slowly, the garden's last whispers brushing against your back like silk threads drifting in the dark. There is no rush. Not here, not now. Each step you take is softer than the one before it. Each breath slower. The cool air settles on your skin, wrapping you in a blanket of quiet. No decisions need to be made. No tasks await. You've done enough for today. The moon rides high overhead, casting silver shadows across the stone path ahead. Somewhere behind a shutter, someone sighs in their sleep. The scent of marjoram lingers, faint but steady, like a farewell you'll always carry. Your mind begins to let go. The images of the guild, those busy hands, the steamy pots, the paper-thin petals pressed into soap begin to blur gently, like patterns in a bar of lye-white Castile. Time stretches, thought loosens. You are adrift now, in the softest sea. And as the last lights go out behind you, as even the stars seem to blink slower, you carry nothing but peace. Just clean, soft peace. Sleep well.